Have you had some mental health challenges, or have you struggled with mental illness or been diagnosed with a mental illness? You're not alone. I have too. Let's talk about this. So, I am not a mental health professional. I'm a life coach. I do have a pre-med background, and I think that's partly why I've wanted to study this so much and I've been studying it for all those years. But really, I feel like my pre-med background was just enough to understand things, but not understand the whole. So, it was not very helpful. So with this, I'm just sharing my experience and what I've learned and some resources that you might find interesting, or one of your friends or family may find it interesting. So again, mental health is a passion of mine because of my own experience. And with my own experience, I was diagnosed 22 years ago with bipolar when I was in the psych ward. And what was going on again, and you can listen to the first episode for the full story, is I had undiagnosed Hashimoto's. I had just taken an antibiotic. I had just had a baby. And the big key is I was also in a destructive marriage. So all of those kind of collided. And basically that lack of sleep and speaking out against my marriage and the conflict that wasn't allowed, because that was a big thing in that marriage at the time, is, couldn't deal with any conflict without being stonewalled and ignored. And basically it just created a perfect storm, and I had mental challenges and didn't sleep. Ended up in a psych ward with a bipolar diagnosis. I think the very interesting thing, and it even bothered me at the time, I'm like, you guys don't seem to care that I'm in this destructive relationship, and you don't seem to care about any of this other stuff. And they really didn't at the time. It was more about let's just get you on medication and kind of isolate your mind, body, spirit, and all of that, which is kind of how Western medicine works, as far as they want to separate your mind and your body and all of that. And that's really not how we work as people. We're really mind, body, spirit, circumstances, trauma, all of that. That is our whole human being. That's just all of us. And it's very hard to separate because each of those have a factor on the other. And so I'm going to talk about how each of them have a factor on our mental challenges. And personally, I don't know, I have a hard time saying, mental illness. I think all of us, you give us enough pressure or stress or whatever, and I think all of us are going to have one sort of mental illness diagnosis or something. I remember hearing, if you went to Ukraine right now where the war is, about every single one of them would be manifesting a mental illness. And so it's very interesting just realizing that we all have a way that our mind is just not, gets to a point and it's just not going to work well, given how we are doing as a whole person. And so it's just, I call it mental challenge, and I definitely remember how mentally challenged I was. And so I have lots of compassion on all of that, and know that that is something that I need to be aware of and know my body and watch out for. So that's really good to know. So again, our whole body can affect us mentally. You can't just separate mind, body, emotions. And so let's talk about the body. I'm so thankful. I feel like there's so much more information on this than there was 22 years ago when I got my misdiagnosis, is about gut health. Like I mentioned, I had just taken an antibiotic, and I could just tell a switch had shifted just like that. It was very strange. And it's much more understood now because we realize that our gut health is super impactful on our brain health. Super impactful. In fact, 95% of our serotonin, which is our good feeling hormone, comes from our gut. And our gut and our brain are communicating. So having great gut health is super important. Things that can sabotage that is like how we eat. It can, what type of, antibiotics. It could be, just like if we're stressed, that also hurts our gut. And so it was interesting as I tried just healing and getting better and getting my body healthier. Being in a chronically stressed marriage relationship was very hard on my body and my gut. So it was very interesting to see that whole interaction. Another big thing about our body and our brains is hormones. So again, at the time when I got the diagnosis, I was having hyperthyroidism, and they missed catching that I had Hashimoto's, but oh my goodness, I could eat and eat and eat and eat. My hair was falling out, my legs are giving out, And I was just getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And I just felt like I was on overdrive and not sleeping. And, later they thought I had thyroid cancer, pulled out my thyroid and said, oops, you have Hashimoto's and you've had it since you were 13. But I definitely could tell I was having thyroid issues, but it didn't get captured and diagnosed at the time when it really needed to at that point. So just all of those things, our gut, our habits, our serotonin in our gut, our hormones, all of that can affect our body, which affects our mind. So it's very interesting, that connection. A lot of other things is just our life, our emotions. Like, how well are we able to manage our emotions? And I don't like the word manage. I think it's more processing our emotions, because managing is like almost looking at like, oh, naughty little kids, we just got to keep you in line. Whereas I feel like emotions are information, and we just need to try to listen to what they're telling us. And so and learning to process that, to feel it, to understand it, to really to process it. Because like they say, what you resist persists, and you can't just suppress it because it comes out other ways. And so that's not good. And for me, it came out in a lot of physical pain and physical challenges with my immune system and even the Hashimoto's. So that was very interesting. But so processing emotion and the circumstances we are in are huge. So for me, like not having a home that was emotionally safe, that just felt like a place I could relax, was very, very stressful on my body, was very stressful on me mentally, and not having an ability to resolve conflict. Also, past traumas, that can very much affect our mental health. I just think that's powerful in the sense of that can have an impact even if we aren't even aware of it. It has a way of kind of like if we blocked it off in a closet in a dark little, it has a way of creeping up. So just going through and doing the work to deal with those, and it's a lot of hard work. One thing I did was EMDR through a counselor, and that was super helpful to get the trauma part of my brain and deal with the trauma and put it in the historical part of my brain. And EMDR I thought was a super helpful tool, and there's a lot of really great tools. I know, like meditation and tapping and just breathing. I know for my husband, like learning how to breathe in a way that changed his brain from fight or flight and soothed it was probably the most powerful tool he learned. And again, to do that, you just take a deep breath in, and then you just breathe out way longer than you breathe in, and you do that for 2 minutes, and it actually biologically changes your brain from going from fight or flight more into letting your cognitive part of your brain, your frontal cortex, start thinking again. So that's a really powerful tool as well.
I'm a pretty kind, easygoing person, helpful. I get along well with others. What? You're saying that makes me a target for selfish and narcissistic people? That's terrible. I don't want relationships like that. If you would like to see how large your kind girl bullseye is, take the quiz below.
What I really want to share too is about some new resources, because gosh, for so long I felt like psychiatry was like, you've got your mental illness, you're stuck with it. And now I think they're seeing that there's kind of a spectrum. And then there's also seeing that, why medication, may be helpful for some people, that there's so much more we can do as far as getting our bodies and our minds healthier that can affect our mental health. And so I really appreciate there's a number of psychiatrists that have written books recently that are very impactful in understanding and bringing to light this kind of this Western medicine way of doing things isn't really serving us as a whole. And so I'm going to talk about some of those books. So The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which is a hard word to say, a hard name to say. That was probably the most impactful book for me, and one of the first books that I read. And also there was a book called The Emotionally Destructive Marriage that was super helpful to understand how a relationship could affect your body to that degree. But The Body Keeps the Score was very validating, because for years, I kind of got the blame that I was the problem. I had the big B diagnosis and that I was the problem, rather than really looking at what the problem truly was. So that was a really good book. Another one is Brain Energy by this is another psychiatrist, Dr. Christopher Palmer, looking just how our whole body health affects our mental health. And another one that I've really liked is An Anatomy of Anxiety by Ellen Vora, and she's a holistic psychiatrist. And that's just amazing as far as looking at the whole of us. And I really resonate with that book from my own experience. I really recommend that. So it's just such a more complicated things and such a more holistic things. And again, emotions like anxiety or depression or those things, those can be information. Those can be very helpful. And again, learning keys to process our emotions is really helpful. I will tell you, so after I got the diagnosis, because usually with bipolar people, they end up cycling with highs and lows um, all the time, even on medication. And I didn't have that, which was probably the first key to my misdiagnosis. And finally, the psychiatrist, like, I think we should get you off medication. And so she tapered me off. And what I learned when I got off medication is, whoa, I was feeling my emotions to a huge, much bigger degree, and how the medication had really buffered that down, which can be very useful for a time. But I had to learn a whole new way to process my emotions. I'm like, whoa, these are really big and bright feelings now. And that's why in the Unravel Notebook that I've made, the second half of it is called the Barf Notebook. And what that was the process I used to just kind of learn to process my emotions and really let them tell me information. And really, that was just, again, a process of barfing out my emotions, my thoughts, and then really kind of sorting them out, asking myself questions like, what are the facts? What are the stories? What are the triggers? What are the boundaries? What are the things I kind of need to have compassion and with love look at the situation, and then sort it out, decide how I want to, look at this, reframe it, and then plan it out. What do I want to do next? Do I need to have a conversation with someone? Do I need to kind of reprocess, a pattern, belief, or anything like that? And that kind of just was a way for me to learn to manage my emotions and thoughts. So that Barf Notebook process. And I would say in order to do that, like, stillness is the key, which I mentioned in another episode how I buffered with busyness. Like, I didn't want to deal with that. I was in a domestic situation that was toxic for me. I just kept myself very busy. And really, stillness is the key. And I think that, the Bible speaks of this in a couple different places. It says, be anxious for nothing, but in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the God of peace will transform all understanding. And the whole point of that is, in order to kind of process through that anxiety, it's prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, and that's really a quiet time. So that's like a quiet processing time, connecting with God time, and that is super important. There's another one that says, be still and know I am God. And I really believe that stillness and listening to ourselves, listening to our body, like, I was so disconnected from my body, but learning to listen to what I didn't want to know and learning to go a little deeper and not being afraid of that, and like processing that is so important. So I would say that if you want to just practice connecting your body and your mind and your whole self more together, I would just really suggest doing the Unravel Notebook that you can get from me, or just starting a journal where you're just, rather than just punching in the dark and trying to process it in your head, rather writing it out and just having a safe place to write it out. Write your worst case scenarios, your fears, and just be curious and listen to yourself with love and compassion. And then really ask yourself, what is the next best step for me with, whether it be just, a processing, a talking to someone, or do I need a specialist? I would say number 3, if you do need a specialist, you can look at, depending on what you need assistance with. I really feel like if it's having to do with mental health, that if you're wanting to get some assistance in that, really looking at an integrative medical professional, a holistic psychiatrist, a naturopath, and there's a lot of different other people. I'm all about, like, if you want counseling, you can go to betterhelp.com and being able to get counseling online, really having a place. But I would just ask yourself, what is your next best step? And we're all growing mentally and emotionally, and that's part of this life. I find that our bodies or our minds are like kind of a house, and we're like, for me, I was like cleaning out one room at a time and getting it ordered and going throughout and my body and being able to do that and getting connected as far as improving my physical health, my emotional health, my mental health, and creating a surroundings that's supportive to all of that. And I just, and a lot of that is just done in community and with love. And so that's why one reason why I do this podcast and have this community. I say grow 1% a day. I think we all can do that. And I love doing that together. And I believe in you. Let your light shine. This is Tara, and I'll see you another day.